The bank manager slid my application back across the desk without looking up. Not after a long deliberation, not after a difficult decision. He slid it back the way you slide a menu back to a waiter when you have already decided you are not hungry. Casually, without ceremony. As if the thing on the other side of the desk was not a person who had spent 4 months preparing that application and 3 years building toward the moment it represented. He said, and I want to be exact about this because I have not forgotten a single word, Miss, a business idea written on 12 pages is not a business. Come back when you have something real. I was 26 years old. I had 12 pages, a spreadsheet, and $430 in my checking account. I was wearing the blazer I had borrowed from my mother because I did not own one professional enough for a bank meeting. I had taken a half day from my job at a call center unpaid because I could not afford to use a full vacation day to be in that office. I picked up my application from the desk. I said thank you. I walked out of the building and stood on the sidewalk in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon and made a decision that I did not fully understand at the time but that I have thought about every single day since. I was not going to wait for anyone to decide I was real. My name is Sarah. And what I built in the 4 years after that Tuesday afternoon is something that Mr. Collins, wherever he is right now, would find very difficult to slide back across a desk. Stay with me. I want to start with my mother. Not because this is her story, it is mine, but because understanding Patricia means understanding everything that shaped the way I think about work and money and what is possible. My mother raised me alone from the time I was 9 years old. Not dramatically alone, she had family nearby, people who helped, but financially, practically, day-to-day alone. She worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. A day position as a medical receptionist and weekend shifts at a grocery store that she kept until I finished high school. She was never in all of those years without work. And she was never in all of those years entirely without worry either. We were middle class in the specific way that is sometimes harder to explain than being poor. We were not in crisis. We were not going without meals or lights. But there was a permanent undertow, a constant low-level awareness that the distance between where we were and where things got genuinely difficult was not as large as it looked from the outside. One unexpected expense, one medical bill, one job loss, and the carefully maintained stability of our life would have shifted dramatically. I grew up understanding the value of money with a precision that I think people who have always had enough of it cannot fully replicate. I understood that it was not infinite. I understood that it required protecting. And I understood from watching my mother that the people who worked the hardest were not automatically the people who ended up with the most of it, and that this was a fact of the world worth being angry about on a low level at all times. I went to a state college on a partial scholarship. I studied business not because I had a specific plan, but because it felt like the closest thing to a degree in options. I graduated with decent grades, significant student debt, and a job at a call center that was supposed to be temporary and lasted 3 years because temporary jobs have a way of becoming permanent when the bills are real. I was 26. I was smart, I was capable, I was working 50 hours a week for a salary that covered my expenses and nothing else. And I had an idea that I had been carrying for 18 months that I genuinely believed could work. That was what I brought to Mr. Collins's desk. That was what he slid back to me. The idea was not glamorous. I want to say that clearly because I think there is a mythology around startup founders that requires the idea to be revolutionary, some technology that reinvents an entire industry, some concept no one has ever thought of before. My idea was simpler than that. And simpler, I have since learned, is almost always better. I had noticed, working at the call center and talking to hundreds of small business owners every month as part of my job, that a consistent and specific problem came up again and again. Small businesses, local shops, independent service providers, 1- and 2-person operations were terrible at their own social media and online presence. Not because they were not smart or capable. Because they were running their businesses alone and social media management was a full-time job in itself, and they did not have a full-time job's worth of time to give it. Large agencies existed to solve this problem. They were also priced for companies with marketing budgets that small independent businesses did not have. There was a gap, a real, documented, consistent gap, between what small businesses needed and what they could afford. I wanted to build a service that lived in that gap. Affordable, specialized social media management for small independent businesses, delivered with the quality of a real agency at a price point that made sense for a business doing $50,000 a year in revenue rather than $5 million. I had done the research. I had talked to business owners, actual conversations, not surveys, real conversations during my lunch breaks and after my shifts. I had mapped the competitive landscape. I had built a pricing model. I had outlined a service structure. I had put all of it into 12 pages that I had revised 11 times before I walked into that bank. It was real. It was a real plan for a real problem with real customers who had told me directly that they would pay for a solution. Mr. Collins did not ask about any of that. He looked at the 12 pages, noted the absence of collateral, noted the absence of existing revenue, and made his decision in approximately 4 minutes. What he could not see, what the 12 pages could not show him, was that I had been preparing for this my entire working life. Every conversation with every small business owner, every hour of research, every revision of those 12 pages. He saw a 26-year-old woman in a borrowed blazer. He did not see what was behind it. I called Nina from the sidewalk outside the bank. Nina had been my closest friend since our sophomore year of college, the kind of friend who tells you the truth, who shows up when things go wrong, and who has an enthusiasm for other people's ideas that is genuine rather than performed. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, then she said, "Okay, so we don't need them. What do we actually need to start?" I had thought about this. I had thought about it as a hypothetical during the months of preparing the loan application. What is the absolute minimum viable version of this business that could generate the first dollar of revenue? The answer was a laptop, which I had, a professional email address, and a basic website which I could build myself for under $50, and one client, just one, who would pay me anything. Nina said, "I know someone. My cousin just opened a bakery. She's been complaining about her Instagram for months. Let me call her tonight." I went back to my call center shift. I answered phones for 5 hours. And in the back of my mind, behind every customer interaction, something was running at a low, constant hum. The specific energy of a person who has just decided, completely and without reservation, that they are going to do something. Nina called that evening. Her cousin, a woman named Rosa who had opened a small bakery 3 months earlier, was willing to try 1 month of social media management for $200. She was not enthusiastic, she was skeptical and said so clearly, but she was willing. $200 for 1 month. That was the beginning. I need to be honest about what the first year looked like, because the version where the first client led immediately to 10 clients and everything accelerated smoothly would be a lie. The first year looked like keeping my call center job. Full-time, 50 hours a week, because the business was not yet generating enough to replace it, and I could not afford to leave a salary without a salary to replace it. I worked on the business before my shift started, during my lunch break, and after my shift ended. I slept less than I should have. I ate badly. I canceled social plans so consistently that the plans mostly stopped being offered, which was its own small grief. Rosa's Bakery, the first client, became the first success story. Her Instagram following grew from 400 to just over 3,000 in 60 days. Her online orders increased. She renewed. And more importantly, she told someone. Word of mouth among small business owners, I discovered, was faster and more reliable than any marketing I could have bought. Small business owners talked to each other, at suppliers, at local events, in the specific community of people who are all navigating the same set of challenges. Rosa mentioned me. 2 of her contacts reached out within a month. By month 4, I had 6 clients. By month 8, 11. The revenue was still modest. I had kept my prices accessible deliberately, but it was real and it was growing, and it was entirely mine, built without a bank's permission. My mother found out about the business at month 3. Not because I told her. I had been protecting her from worrying, but because Rosa's Bakery was around the corner from Patricia's medical office, and Rosa had mentioned my name to a colleague who knew my mother. She called me on a Thursday evening and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "I didn't want you to worry." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I have thought about many times since. She said, "Sarah, I have been watching you work your whole life. I have never once worried about whether you would figure something out. I've only ever worried about whether you'd let yourself believe you could." She asked what she could do to help. I told her I needed a better laptop. Mine was 5 years old and slowing down in ways that were affecting my work. She transferred me 1 month of her salary the following Monday morning, without telling me she was going to. Without making it a moment, I paid her back within 4 months. She pretended not to care about the repayment. I cared about it enormously. Month 7 brought something I had not planned for and could not have engineered. I had been attending free local business events, Chamber of Commerce meetings, small business association gatherings, anything that was free and might put me in a room with potential clients or useful information. At a library event on scaling a service business, the audience was maybe 20 people, folding chairs, bad coffee. I sat next to a man named Frank. Frank was 63, retired. He had built and sold a marketing services company over the course of 30 years and had come to the event. He told me, because he found retirement boring and liked to stay connected to what was happening in the industry. We talked for the entire event and for 40 minutes after it ended in the parking lot. I told him what I was building. He asked the kind of questions that told me immediately he understood the space, not theoretical questions, operational ones. Margin structure, client acquisition cost, churn rate, capacity ceiling. At the end of the conversation he said, "You have something real here. Your pricing is too low, your service scope is too broad, and you have no system for replacing yourself as the business grows. Those are all fixable problems. Would you like help fixing them?" I said yes before I processed whether I was supposed to negotiate or ask for time to think. Frank became my mentor. Unpaid, he was not interested in equity or compensation. He said flatly, he was interested in the problem. We met every 2 weeks for 8 months. He helped me rebuild my pricing structure, a process that required me to raise my rates by 40% and cost me 2 clients who left and brought in 3 new ones who stayed. He helped me build a service delivery system that could eventually operate without me doing every task personally. He helped me write the first version of a business plan that was, as he put it, something you could actually hand to an investor. That business plan became important later. Specifically, it became important when I met Alina Chang. Alina Chang ran a small angel investment fund focused on early-stage service businesses founded by women. She had built her own company in her 30s, exited in her mid-40s, and spent the decade since deploying capital and expertise into businesses that reminded her of where she had been. I found her through a women in business networking event that Nina had dragged me to on a Friday evening when I would have preferred to be working. I have thanked Nina for that approximately once a month since. Alina was not the keynote speaker. She was in the audience, same as me. She attended these events. She told me later, specifically to find people before they became too expensive to invest in early. We were introduced by the event organizer during the networking portion. I had my business plan, Frank's version, the real one, in my bag because I had started carrying it everywhere after Frank had told me that the best investor conversations happened when you were not looking for them. Alina asked what I did. I told her. She asked 3 follow-up questions. They were the right 3 questions, the ones that cut directly to the variables that actually determined whether a service business like mine was investable. Margin, scalability, defensibility, I had answers. Real ones. Frank had made sure of that. She asked if I had a deck. I gave her the business plan instead and told her I did not believe in decks that replaced conversations. I believed in conversations and I had a plan if she wanted the detail. She looked at me over the top of the plan for a moment. Then she said, "I like that answer. Can we meet next week?" The meeting the following week lasted 2.5 hours. At the end of it, Alina offered me $120,000 for a 7% equity stake. The valuation implied by that offer, applied to a business I had started with $200 from Nina's cousin, made me sit very still in my chair for a moment while I processed it. I told her I needed 48 hours to think and to have an attorney review the terms. She said, "Good, I would have been concerned if you hadn't." The $120,000 from Alina did not transform the business overnight. I want to say that clearly because I think the mythology around investment rounds suggests that money is the thing that makes a business work. It is not. Money is what removes the obstacles that are slowing down a business that already works. What already worked was the service. My client retention rate was 83%, meaning that once a business signed with me, they almost always stayed. That number was the business. It meant the product was right. It meant that small business owners were getting value that was real enough to keep paying for month after month. What the capital allowed me to do was hire. Nina came on first. She had been contributing time informally for months, and it was past time to make it official and paid. She became my COO in title and in function, taking over client operations and team management so that I could focus on growth and product development. We hired 3 more people in the first 6 months after the investment. I moved out of my apartment's second bedroom, which had been functioning as the company's office, into a real workspace. We rebuilt the website. We invested in tools and systems that automated the parts of our service delivery that did not require human judgment. The client count grew from 22 at the time of the investment to 61 12 months later. Revenue crossed $500,000 in year 3. And then, in year 4, something happened that I had not specifically planned for but that Frank had told me to be ready for if the growth continued. A larger agency came to us, not as a competitor, as a potential acquirer. They had been watching our growth, our client retention numbers, our market positioning among small independent businesses, a segment they had identified as underserved and had not found a good way to reach. They wanted to know if we were interested in a conversation. I called Alina. She said 3 words, "Don't say yes." We did not say yes. We said we were interested in a conversation, which is a different thing, and we had the conversation from a position of a company that was growing independently and had options. That negotiation took 4 months. It ended in a partnership structure rather than an acquisition. They gained access to our client network and small business expertise. We gained their resources and infrastructure and a valuation that placed the company at just over $1 million. Not a sale, a valuation. The company was still mine. Alina's 7% was worth considerably more than it had been. And the business that had started with $200 from a skeptical bakery owner was now, by any reasonable measure, exactly the kind of real thing Mr. Collins had told me to come back with. I want to tell you about the bank, because you are wondering, and you should be. I did not go back to Mr. Collins. I want to be clear about that because I think the version of this story where I returned triumphantly with $1 million valuation and slide it across his desk would be satisfying, but would also be something I did not do and do not wish I had done. What I did was open a business account at a different institution, one that had been introduced to me through Alina's network, about 18 months into the business. The banker who handled that account was professional, efficient, and treated the business as the real entity it was by then. About 2 years after the original rejection, I received a piece of mail from Mr. Collins's bank. A promotional offer, credit products for small businesses, encouraging applications. I recycled it, not dramatically. Not with a speech to myself about vindication. I just recycled it. Because the bank and Mr. Collins had become genuinely irrelevant to what I was building, in the specific way that obstacles become irrelevant when you have moved far enough past them that they are no longer on the road you are traveling. The rejection had been painful at the time. It had felt like a door closing in a way that questioned my legitimacy before I had been given the chance to demonstrate it. I will not minimize that. But it had also been clarifying in a way that no approval could have been. It had forced me to build without permission, to find the minimum viable version of the idea and execute it before anyone had validated it from the outside, to prove the business's reality through revenue rather than through a bank's assessment of my collateral. The rejection, in a way I could not have seen on that Tuesday sidewalk, had sent me in exactly the right direction. I am careful about the lessons I draw from my own story, because I think anyone can do this if they just believe hard enough. Version of entrepreneurship is not only dishonest, but actively harmful to the people who hear it and apply it, and then blame themselves when the variables that worked in my specific situation do not replicate in theirs. I had Frank, that was luck. I sat next to the right person at a library event. I had Alina, that was also luck mixed with Nina dragging me to an event I wanted to skip. I had a mother who transferred me 1 month of her salary on a Monday morning without making it a moment. These things are not replicable on demand. What I can tell you, honestly, without mythology, is the things that were choices rather than circumstances. I did not wait for permission. I found the smallest possible version of the idea that could generate the first dollar and I executed it before I had anyone's approval. I talked to actual customers before I built anything. 37 conversations with small business owners before I charged anyone $1. The business worked because those conversations told me what the business needed to be before I built it. I raised my prices when Frank told me they were too low, even though raising them scared me. Every time I have been afraid to charge what the work was worth and done it anyway, the business has grown. I took the help that was offered. From Nina, from Frank, from my mother, from a leaner. I did not refuse support out of pride or the need to prove I had done it entirely alone. Nobody builds anything real entirely alone, and I did not go back to Mr. Collins. Not to prove something, not because I was not tempted in the early months to imagine the version of events where I did, but because the energy that revenge requires is energy that building requires, and I only had so much of it, and I knew which use of it was going to matter in 10 years. If you have been told that your idea is not real, by a bank, by an institution, by a person across a desk who decided in 4 minutes that you were not worth the risk, I want you to hear something that I mean completely. Their assessment of your idea is an assessment of the evidence they can see. It is not an assessment of the evidence that does not yet exist because you have not built it yet. The evidence comes from building, not from convincing someone else to believe in the building before it happens. Go build the smallest possible version of the thing, get one customer, get $1, then get another. The credibility you are waiting for someone else to grant you is the credibility you build yourself. One client, 1 month, one renewed contract at a time. If this story gave you something useful today, share it. You know someone who is sitting on an idea waiting for a permission that is not coming from the outside. Tell them to stop waiting. And next week, the story of a woman who was told she was too young, too inexperienced, and too unknown to be taken seriously in her industry. What she did in 18 months made her the most talked about name in that industry. Subscribe and turn on notifications. That story is coming very soon. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.